I want to let you know right up front that those of you who take notes and follow along in your bulletin, there's an error inside. If you open up to the notes section, one of the scriptures that I'm going to refer to today is 2 Timothy. And I think I may have written 2 Peter in there. So if you follow along and take notes, it's going to be 2 Timothy. You'll see it on the screen when we get there, but it won't be 2 Peter. Well, good morning to everybody. In the year that I've been pastoring the church, this is the fullest I've seen this room, so we're so glad to have all of you here. It's great to see our family and friends, and every bit as much we welcome those who are guests to our church, and we hope you'll have a great experience with us this morning. And as you know, today is Mother's Day. And as I prepared for this sermon, I learned that I'm a fool. Some of you are shaking your heads like, yeah, we knew that. I learned that I'm a fool because I've been spoiled. You know, I've had a great experience. I've had a great experience with my own mother. I've had a great experience with my grandparents. I had a great experience with my mother-in-law. And so I've just seen good mothers. And I know now that this is not a happy day for everybody, as it is for me. And so before we begin, before we celebrate, before we honor mothers, I do want to let you know that we recognize those for whom this is not a happy day. Those of you who may have lost your mothers. And this may be the first Mother's Day without mom. Or maybe those of us who did not have the most nurturing, loving mother. Or maybe as we look back at our lives and say, haven't been the most nurturing or loving mother. There may be some here who have lost children. And so I wanted you to know that we had a team gathered this morning. And we prayed for you. We prayed for you today. We pray that God would bless you with peace and comfort, and forgiveness and hope, and even joy. And I've also asked some of our very trusted friends, some of my very trusted friends, to make themselves available to you after service. So if there's anyone in the room who feels like they'd like to pray after the service this morning, just outside these doors you'll find a room we call our Heritage Room. It's got some glass windows and glass doors. We'll direct you there. But if you want to pray, I've asked a few of my very trusted friends. Dan, would you stand up so people can see you? Sue Youngblood, would you stand up? And Eva Jabay, would you stand up so that people can recognize you? I've asked these folks to be available to you after service, that if anyone wants to pray, and it's not just for those who may be hurting or grieving. If anyone desires prayer this morning, they'll be available to you, and they'd love to pray with you. And so we'd ask you to join them. Well, today is Mother's Day, and so we wish a very happy Mother's Day to all the moms who had, have, or will have children. You know, today you saw from that video that we're honoring adoptive moms and birth moms and foster moms. We're honoring moms-to-be and single moms and stepmoms and working moms of every kind. Because no matter what kind of a mom you are, you're a mom. And so we honor you today. And I know there are some for whom I have a very special place in my heart today. Those of you couples who long to have children. Some of you know my story. For 6 years when Janine and I were first married, we really struggled to have children. And so we know some of that pain and the frustration and the confusion that comes with that. And I want you to know that our team prayed for you today. We prayed for you. And James tells us in his book, James says that we should pray with expectation. We should pray and give thanks as if God's already done the good thing that we're asking for. And so we prayed for you today, but right now we're honoring you too. We're honoring you because we trust and we believe, and we have examples in this church of people who once thought they would never have a family, and today they are blessed and they have beautiful families, and some through medicine and some through adoption. And I don't know what path God will take with you, but I do know that if you continue to pray and you obey the Lord and you remain faithful, He will bless you and He will give you a family. And so we honor you today as well. Today's message will even speak to young women who will be moms 5-10 years from now. The message even speaks to those who are tricked into being a mom just for a short time. Let me explain that. My sister-in-law is here today, and when she comes into town, she lives out in Washington, D.C. currently, and when she comes into town, she's always real excited to see the kids. And she'll usually make a trip out to the house, and she'll say, hey, I'd like to come and see the kids. And when Janine and I are on our game, when we're being very crafty, we look at each other and we're like, oh, that's the day we were going to go shopping for furniture. She says, oh, I'm only in town for a day or two, and I really wanted to see the kids. And so we'll say something like, well, I mean, you could come out here and watch them. And, she always takes us up on that. She's great with the kids. She loves the kids. And so we appreciate that. And so even just for that day, because when we go, we don't come back. We have dinner, and we shop for furniture, but we have dinner and maybe see movies and walk through parks. And for that day, she's mom. And she's got a great husband. His name is Sean. I wish he was here because I had some good jokes for him today. But I love that guy. Some of my youth group kids asked me when I talked about it, they're like, well, who's marrying him? Mary Beth or you? And he's a great uncle, and so he helps her out. But yeah, they get to be like mom for a day. If there's diapers, they're changing them. If there's feedings, if there's messes, they're cleaning it. And so we honor all of you in any capacity who are moms. And my wife, my wife is the one who spends most of the time raising my 3 kids, and of course gave me 3 children. And so we honor you today as well. Well, let me give you some fun facts about Mother's Day. First of all, Mother's Day is always celebrated on the 2nd Sunday in May. So if you don't know what date it is, it's always 2nd Sunday in May. It became a national holiday in 1914. President Wilson declared it a national holiday. There are 50 countries around the world who celebrate Mother's Day at some point during the year. Phone companies tell us that Mother's Day is the busiest day of year for phone transmissions. Mother's Day is the 2nd most attended day in churches in America. And get this. This tells you how smart the card companies are. $671 million was spent this weekend. Maybe even before this weekend, but Dad, you know it was this weekend. On Mother's Day cards. In addition to that, $1.9 million was spent on flowers. And moms, if you receive flowers, maybe you got roses, maybe you got a climbing rose, or whatever flowers it is that you like, I want to let you know that if your husband really, really wanted to honor you, he would have bought you, I hope I say this right, a Shenzhen Nongki orchid. It's the most expensive flower in the world. It costs $248,912. My wife's getting a carnation. Who said the cash? Claire? Okay. Also, in the former Yugoslavia, when they celebrated Mother's Day, here was their tradition. Children would tie up their moms. That's the celebration. That's what they would do. At Halloween, we dress up in costumes, and people think that's a little strange. Well, in Yugoslavia, at least the former Yugoslavia, the children would tie their moms up, and the only way the moms could get free was to pay a ransom of sweet treats. So some fun facts for Mother's Day. Well, hey, let's begin our sermon today. And so if you have a Bible, would you open it to the beginning? Let's start in the beginning. Open up to Genesis chapter 2. Genesis chapter 2. In Genesis chapter 2, verse 18, those who don't have Bibles can follow along on the screen. You see these words. It says, "Then the Lord God said, 'It is not good for the man to be alone. I will make him a helper who is just right for him.'" Now, I don't know how many of you have had the experience to walk through a men's dorm in college. If you've ever been to a men's dorm, or a single man's apartment, or maybe your grown son's bedroom, or a bachelor pad. I don't know if you've ever looked into a single guy's refrigerator or looked into his cabinets. If you've ever seen a single guy try to change diapers, if you've ever seen any of those things, you can probably agree it is not good for the man to be alone. And so that is why God made a helper who is just right for him. And as long as we're in Genesis, flip back just a couple of pages to Genesis chapter 1. We're going to look at verse 26. Typically, I read from the New Living Translation, the NLT. It's pretty easy to understand, but this particular translation I liked a little better. This is from the English Standard Version. Verse 26 says, "Then God said, 'Let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and of the livestock, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth.'" And I want to focus here specifically on this idea of let us make man in our image. And of course, those of us who know Scripture know that this doesn't mean man as male, it means mankind. And God said, let us make mankind in our image. God has always always in perfect balance. He's never out of balance. We know some things about God. We know that God is just. God is merciful. We know that God is fierce. And God is gentle. He brings judgment, and yet he offers grace. He is always in perfect balance. Genesis 1:26 tells us that God made both man and woman in his likeness. And while men and women are both made in God's likeness, I think we can acknowledge that, typically speaking, generally speaking, there are some differences between men and women. And ladies, I would assert today that you got some of the finer attributes of God. Gentleness, softness, selflessness, nurturing, generosity, forgiveness. These are the things that God gave to women, and more specifically, to moms. And let's face it, moms have to be forgiving. I mean, consider all the pain that moms endure from conception to birth. In fact, if we continue in Genesis, look at Genesis 3, verse 16. Genesis chapter 3, verse 16. God said this to women. After Eve and Adam had both eaten of the fruit and they both sinned, God said, okay, this is the consequence for the woman, this is the consequence for the man. But we start here where God is speaking about the consequence to the woman. And then he said to the woman, I will sharpen the pain of your pregnancy, and in pain you will give birth. And let's face it, those of us who have watched children grow up, we know that pain is not isolated to labor. It's not isolated to labor, not for moms, no. That pain endures and it continues until well after children leave their home. In fact, sometimes beyond when children leave their home. I mean, there's the pain of breastfeeding. There's all the sleepless nights that moms go through. There's cleaning up vomit and the pee-pee and poo-poo accidents. And there's disobedience. There's thanklessness and a lack of appreciation. There's the disappointing report cards and the calls from teachers or police stations. There's all these pains that moms endure. And so it is not just limited to birth. In fact, one mother said about motherhood, she said, the joy of motherhood is what a woman experiences when all of her children finally go to sleep. A mom asked her friend, she said, hey, remember when I was in college how I had 3 theories about raising children? And then she continued, she said, well, now I have 3 kids, but no theories. And just to have a little fun, I'll tell you a story about a mom who walked along a beach and found a lamp. And so the mom, she reached down, she picked up the lamp, and she rubbed it. And, of course, you know what happened. A genie popped out, because that's what happens when you rub a lamp. So the genie popped out, but this was a crusty genie. Crusty genie. He came out, he's kind of, just ugly. And he said, hey, listen, I've had like 4 people pick me up on the beach this week already, and I'm kind of tired. So you can forget about 3 wishes. You got 1 wish. 1 wish, make it a good one. So the mom thought for a minute, and she said, well, I've always dreamed of vacationing in Hawaii. I'd really like to vacation in Hawaii. I hear it's beautiful there, and so yeah, I'd love to vacation in Hawaii, but I'm afraid to fly. And so my wish is that you would build a bridge to Hawaii. And of course the genie said, are you kidding me? Do you know how much concrete that would take? Do you know how much steel it would take to build a bridge to Hawaii? Do you know how deep the piers would have to reach to the bottom of the Pacific Ocean to build a bridge to Hawaii? Come on, lady. Can you think of something just a little bit more reasonable? And she said, well, I guess it's not just Hawaii that I was interested in. I guess it's the vacation that I'm interested in. And so, yeah, what I would really love is I would love just one day where my children are completely obedient. I would love just one day where my children respect me and appreciate me. I would like just one day where my children pick up after themselves. I would like just one day where my husband comes home and cooks dinner and everyone just appreciates me. And the genie said, okay, all right. And so the genie raised his hands and got his feet together and he said those magic words. He said, oh, spirit of my ancestors, I call upon your great and mighty power now. I ask you now to build a bridge to Hawaii. A lot of build-up for that, wasn't there? Sorry about the payoff. Well, We're going to focus today, the teaching piece on Matthew chapter 25. And many of you have heard this scripture, and it doesn't just apply to moms, but I don't know that this is so much a teaching for moms, because it's a teaching for everyone who calls themselves a Christ follower. Everyone who would say that Jesus is Lord of my life, this applies to us. But I think this is a great demonstration of motherhood. And so in Matthew chapter 25, we read these words. This is verses 35 and 36. For I was hungry, and you fed me. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me into your home. I was naked, and you gave me clothing. I was sick, and you cared for me. I was in prison, and you visited me. Now, those of us who are familiar with the passage, we know that Jesus is teaching here, and Jesus is saying, hey, listen, when people come to heaven, there's going to be a moment where we separate the sheep from the goats. Okay, the sheep are going to be over here, the goats are going to be over here, and to one side I'm going to say these things, that when I was hungry you fed me, when I was thirsty you gave me drink, when I was sick, and so on and so forth. He said, but then there are going to be others to whom I say, you saw me hungry and you did nothing. You saw me thirsty and you did nothing. And so that's the context of the teaching. But I think this is just a great picture of motherhood. A great picture of motherhood. I mean, let's break it down and let's look at what Jesus said here. He says, I was hungry, and you fed me. Now, I'd like you to think for just a moment about when a child enters the world. When a child enters the world, that child is helpless. That child can do nothing. Later on, Jesus will call these people for the least of these. When you have done for the least of these, you have done for me. I don't know that anyone could be more the least of these than an infant who enters the world. And when that infant comes into the world, who is it that feeds that infant? It's mom. And when that infant is thirsty and that infant needs a drink that only mom can provide, who gives that child drink? It's mom. This particular translation says, I was a stranger and you invited me in. Well, an infant comes along, and those of you who have had children, you know, does that shake up your life a little bit? Does that shake up your home just a little bit? Shake up your marriage just a little bit? You bet it does. It shakes things up. It's like a stranger has entered your life now, and things have been shaken up, and somehow the mom has to find balance in all that. She has to find balance in her home. She has to find balance in her marriage. She has to find balance in all that she is and does as she invites this stranger into her life. It says here, you were naked. I was naked and you gave me clothes. I don't know about your kids. My kids were born naked. Gave me clothes. And to me, I go just a little bit further, because one of the most thankless jobs, I joked about it earlier, is, it's changing diapers. So, putting shirts on and putting socks on, that's not so hard. But moms every day have to dress their children. I heard a number the other day, I don't know if this is accurate, but I heard that your kids will go through some 6,000 diapers. 6,000 diapers is a number I heard. I should have probably researched it. That's a lot of diapers. Jesus said, I was sick, and you cared for me. And I know there are a lot of moms around the room right now who can think about raising their children. You can think about the times when your children were sick, when their noses were running, or they were coughing, or they just got so cranky and crabby because of the fever, the ear infection. You can think about the times that they threw up all over everything, maybe even you. The times that you had to cancel everything and take them to the doctor. The times that they were in the hospital and you had to go and visit them and you had to stay with them. When I was a kid, for some reason I had a really weird reaction to the flu, and every year around Thanksgiving I used to get this thing, and it was awful, because not only would my vomiting and my other issues kind of tear up the house, and my mom had to deal with that, but then she would go to the hospital with me and they would want to hook me up to an IV so that they could pump fluids into me. And I had like this terror over IVs, to the point where they used to have to bring nurses and doctors to sit on my little 8-year-old body and hold me down, because I was like I was possessed or something. And my mom had to endure that, and I imagine that probably was a little bit embarrassing for her. Jesus says, I was in prison and you visited me. And so for some moms here in the church today, that literally means I was in prison. Some of you may have had children, may have children who have been in or are in prison, and so you go and you visit them, and you pray for them, for their safety, and you endure your fear of what they're going through, and you look forward and hope for a day when they'll be released. But if that's not you, there are other kinds of prisons. Some of you moms have endured the prisons of addiction. You've watched your children struggle with addiction, and you wish you could step in and fix it, but you couldn't. You just didn't have the key that would turn that lock. Some of you have watched your children deal with the prison of fear or frustration or depression, and there was nothing you could do to fix that. In some ways, it was like being in a prison yourselves. There are lots of different kinds of prisons. Some of you moms have had children who have nightmares, and they're just scared to death. And they run into your room and they cuddle close to you looking for safety because they're locked in the prison of their own fears. A prison where mom's the only one who can protect them. And although Jesus doesn't state it here, I would say this. Let's not forget about the most important of all the duties that mother fulfills. She teaches her children to love, honor, and obey God. 2 Timothy chapter 1, verse 5. This is the one I said we have a correction if you're following along in your notes. This is 2 Timothy. Paul writes this. He's writing a letter to Timothy, and he says, very early in the letter, he says, I remember your genuine faith. Okay, so he starts out, he says, Timothy, I remember your faith, your genuine faith. It's sort of a compliment, an encouragement. Timothy, I remember your faith, but then look at what he says. For you share the faith that first filled your grandmother Lois and your mother Eunice. And I know that the same faith continues strong in you. Where did his faith come from? It came from his mother. But Paul says here that it also came from his grandmother. And we know that faith is passed from generation to generation to generation. And so we honor grandmothers here today, not just because they're mothers, but because grandmother is an incredibly important role as well. There's a story from the Holocaust, a man named Solomon Rosenberg. And I read this story in 3 different sources, and I'll be honest with you. I tried my best to verify it. I didn't find anything to suggest that it's not true, but I can't tell you for sure that it is true. But I did find it in 3 different sources, and so I'm going to share it with you. Solomon Rosenberg was a Jewish man during the Holocaust. He was in Europe, and he had a family. And he and his family were moved to one of the camps. And the rules of the camp were really quite simple. As long as you can work, you'll be